It's a bit complicated. In the United States, there's a very strong constituency among the American people who believe very fervently in the rights of the family and the rights of parents to raise their children. And unfortunately, there have been some real misconceptions about the convention that recognizing the rights of children will somehow undermine the rights of parents to raise and guide their children as they grow up. So, for example, there's an idea that parents will not be able to homeschool their children if the U.S. ratifies the convention, and that's ridiculous. Actually, there's nothing in the convention that would prohibit that, or that the convention would somehow give children the right to sue their parents, if they got too much homework, or things like that. And I think, unfortunately, there's been a fairly effective misinformation campaign in the United States about what the convention would mean for American children and American families that has derailed the ratification process. We hope that that is going to change and that people will realize that the convention speaks repeatedly about the importance of families, the importance of parents in raising their children, and that, after 20 years of experience, in many other countries we've seen very positive effects. We haven't seen the detrimental effects that some of the critics have mentioned. One of the more outlandish scenarios that's been raised is that somehow UN Blue Helmets, peacekeepers, would come to U.S. homes and remove children by force if children had filed complaints that they weren't being treated properly by their parents. And, that's just not going to happen. Child labor and human rights abuses against children are by no means an issue that only affects the developing world. They exist in the United States as well, and certainly there is exploitative and abusive child labor happening in the United States. Certainly the biggest area that we are concerned about is agriculture. There are hundreds of thousands of children who are working in the fields to help harvest food that ends up, in U.S. supermarkets. They're picking lettuce, they're picking in orchards, picking apples, they're, harvesting cucumbers, asparagus, all kinds of different crops. And they are oftentimes exposed to pesticides, which cause serious health concerns. They are working with heavy machinery and sharp knives that leads to one of the highest rates of job-related injuries in the country. And oftentimes they're working long hours that cause them to stay out of school or drop out at early ages. Only about 55% of child farm workers in the United States ever graduate from high school. And one of the most serious problems is that there's a double standard in U.S. law. The child labor laws that apply to kids who work at Burger King, who can only work 3 hours a day on a school day, or can't work below the age of 15, they don't apply to agriculture. So there are children as young as 11, 12 years old that are working 10, 12, even 14 hours a day in the fields. And in fact, children as young as 12 can work unlimited hours outside of school hours in the United States, and it's legal. So one of the things that we hope to see in the United States is a change in these laws so that children working in agriculture receive the same protections as child labor laws that apply to other working youth. I think that fundamentally people do care about children. They really do. And they care about children in their own country, and they care about children in other countries. In the United States, we saw this a couple of years ago when we were looking for ways to get the United States government to be more active in promoting implementation of the new international standards on child soldiers. And we started lobbying in Congress to promote a piece of U.S. legislation that would limit U.S. military assistance, so basically guns, training, or other military support or supplies to governments that were using child soldiers in their forces. And it was surprising how much support we got for that effort. And in Congress, we had both Democrats and Republicans alike coming together because they all recognized that it was not right for children to be used as soldiers in armed conflicts. And in fact, this bill was adopted by Congress last year, and it was signed by President Bush in December of 2008, which now positions the United States to take a more leading role in reducing the use of child soldiers internationally. And it has also changed practices for its own troops and its own recruitment or its own deployment policies abroad. But certainly, there are some issues that are more difficult than others. In the United States, another issue that we're working on is juvenile justice and the fact that the United States is the only country in the world that sentences children to life in prison without the possibility of parole for crimes that they committed before the age of 18. There are currently around 2,600 individuals in the United States that are serving this sentence, and there's no one in the rest of the world, in any country, that is serving a similar sentence. And unfortunately, there are some people who say, well, if these kids have committed terrible crimes, they deserve that kind of punishment. They deserve to spend the rest of their days in prison. And we don't believe that. We believe that children have a unique capacity for rehabilitation, and that even if they have committed terrible crimes, they should have that possibility to rehabilitate and hopefully one day re-enter society.